of your company that's leading the way in natural health care solutions that offer nutritional and hormonal balance. Along these lines, I'd like to talk about the gentle ways of addressing the cause of our disorders, not the symptoms, but the cause, and thereby allowing the body to heal itself and thus achieve this hormonal balance. This was the philosophy that kept me on track when writing the estrogen alternative. But before I begin my story, I must tell you that it's kind of ironic that I'm up here today talking, because after the book was published, I told Dr. Gersten, my co-author, I'm so glad I wrote everything down that I felt needed to be said, because now I never have to get up, face my fear of getting up and speaking in public. So please bear with me, because I'm not in my comfort zone, and the only reason I've summoned the courage to get up and speak out today is that I want to help women as much as I have been helped through the vast amount of information that's out there, but that is not available through mainstream medicine. An important issue that should first be stressed is the increasing evidence that exposure to environmental estrogenic toxins as a cause of a large number of health problems unique to women. Even the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences knows there's a public health threat, as they're spending $10.6 million on what the scientists call endocrine disruptors. These are the numerous estrogen mimicking toxins in these surroundings, which include chemical waste that ends up in our food, our air, and our water. And many of these have been found to block our hormone receptors. But we don't have to be scientists to know there's a problem, as an increasing number of women are developing breast and endometrial cancer. Year after year, they question their doctors. They're confused. They say, I don't know what to believe. My doctor tells me one thing, the labels, the warnings tell me something altogether different. And the medical books give lots of information on conventional hormone replacement, but the underlying message is, use good judgment, weigh the risks against the benefits. Well, how can we use good judgment when the drugs that are given us not only impair our good judgment, but also cause our risks? Well, there's good news, and answers that are not only sensible, but really quite logical and based on over 250 references and clinical studies which we have found and included in the estrogen alternative. So where should we start? Let's start from the very beginning. A very good place to start. Aren't those lyrics from a song? Yeah, I thought so, but I won't sing, I promise. First of all, there are two major hormones produced by the ovaries. Not one, but two. They're called estrogen and progesterone. They have been partners for a long time, but as we age, they begin to decline. Experiencing irregular cycles is one of the signs our hormone levels are beginning to fall. And this is normal, aging. We no longer need high levels for making babies anymore. So it's only fair to ask, what is causing our PMS and menopausal problems? The discomforts we feel are normally due to our progesterone levels falling below our estrogen levels. As Dr. John Lee, our foremost authority on this subject, tells us, estrogen is continuously being produced by conversion of the adrenal steroids in body fat. Dr. Raymond Peet, another expert in the field, confirms this by stating that even when the ovaries have been removed, estrogen is then produced in fat tissue found in every part of the body. And studies show that the more stress we have, the more serious is this imbalance, especially during the aging process, as progesterone keeps falling lower than estrogen. So what happens when women go to their medical doctors and are prescribed more estrogen for PMS, menopause, cyclic problems, birth control, following the removal of the ovaries, and even infertility? This estrogen prescription will actually increase the hormonal imbalance, to increase estrogen stimulatory effect on cell growth, and of course greatly increase our health risks for breast and uterine cancer. And what is so tragic is no matter what your symptoms, you will most likely leave the doctor's office with a synthetic estrogen normally prescribed, often Premarin, which according to Dr. Marcus Lowe is the #1 top-selling drug in the country. No wonder cancer continues to be on the rise. Do we have better choices? You bet. There's a safe and natural alternative whereby we can raise our progesterone levels so as to oppose estrogen stimulatory effect on cell growth. We have the one transparency. This is a picture of one of 5,000 plants that are used for that purpose. The two plants that we talk about in the book that are most commonly used are soybeans, which contain a sterol called stigmasterol. And another plant is called the wild yam, and they contain a sterol called diasgenin. What's so amazing is that these sterols can be converted in a lab to make to a molecule that duplicates the progesterone activity that's normally produced in the ovaries. This is incredible. Hormone replacement found in plant life and with no side effects. So here we have a natural product that can oppose estrogen stimulatory effect and at the same time produce many physiological benefits. What more could the medical industry ask for? A botanical remedy that alleviates women's discomforts? And why would the pharmaceutical industry want to change a natural substance that's so effective? Well, the problem for the drug companies is it's fundamentally a food and can't be patented without altering the molecule. So in order to make it prescriptive and thus profitable, they've spent their efforts producing synthetic compounds called progestins. These chemically altered forms bring with them a wide range of unpleasant and dangerous effects, the details of which you will be hearing later on from the doctors later on in the program. Some physicians will tell us that these synthetic imitations are progesterone, but they are not. One artificial progestin that's commonly used is called Provera. They come under many names and are used in hormone replacement and even birth control. Nevertheless, these risky drugs continue to be given, and now they are being combined in the same pill with estrogen. One of the newest ones is called Prempo, standing for Premarin and Provera. The other frightening concern is that most doctors will prescribe estrogen alone for those who have had a hysterectomy. This routine procedure brings to my mind an astute comment made by Dr. Lee, and I quote, "Estrogen prescribed alone represents a victory of advertising over science." Who needs science when we have advertising? Senseless thinking. The public's continual influence by advertisements are resulting in tragic circumstances. We pay so dearly for this misinformation, and how sad when estrogen's partner, the disregarded progesterone, is the key to eliminating the risk created by the dangerous effects of estrogen. So what we're mainly here to talk about today is balancing hormone levels. Immediately following my talk, you will hear from Dr. Judy Gersten, whose special interest is in the detection and prevention of osteoporosis. She's not only my co-author of this book and technical editor, but she has also played a major role in my first book called Today's Health Alternative. This book is the foundation that set the stage of the estrogen alternative. It's not only about the past and present and great future of the largest natural health care profession in the US, but it also explains how chiropractic care not only relieved me of 12 years of suffering from back pain, chronic bronchitis, and insomnia, but also explains how correcting nerve interference helped me avoid a hysterectomy. Both of these very related books summarize a whole picture of achieving health, and both include nutritional information so pertinent to building up our immune system. As we all know, preventing disease is dependent on a combination of many health options, not just progesterone alone, or vitamin C alone, or anything by itself. God created many ways of healing that complement each other, yet not need a prescription. In today's health alternative, we focus on one of those essential ways by explaining why poor health can often follow months and even years after a trauma, a car accident, fall, or sports injury. To illustrate this, I wrote about my personal story, which began after the unsuspected trauma of birth. Health problems started following the birth of my son. 2 months after he was born, the left side of my body became paralyzed. A blood clot had developed in my brain. 5 specialists were called on my case. My neurosurgeon was completely puzzled, and the other doctor said, "But she's only 35, too young for a stroke." Way back then, 28 years ago, there was no Dr. John Lee or Dr. Katrina Dalton, at least not in Columbus, Ohio, to enlighten my specialists about why new mothers after giving birth may suffer either from postpartum depression or, in my case, blood clotting tendencies in the presence of high estrogen and cortisol levels. What a revelation it was when finally, 2 days after this traumatic incident, I came across the documentation that explained why this happened to me. It was while researching the estrogen alternative that I learned that during pregnancy, the placenta takes over the production of our progesterone. Therefore, after delivery of the baby and the placenta, there is a sudden drop of progesterone. Thus, hormonal imbalance can often occur following the birthing process. Recently, this memory of my personal experience really hit home when I heard on the news, I don't know if anybody else has heard this, but 2 days after giving birth, a woman died from a blood clot on her brain. This story caused an instant flashback of my own experience and realization of what could have happened to me and could very well be happening to others. And all because of lack of information on this subject. But back to my story. In the path of providence and after many sessions of physical therapy, I learned to walk again. But intermittent hip pain continued to worsen throughout the years. I also began to have female disorders. I was going to all sorts of specialists with titles ranging from gynecologist to endocrinologist and was prescribed many types of medication, which caused further chaos in my body. I was told I needed a hysterectomy, and a second and third opinion supported this finding. Since I was also suffering from back pain, I told my orthopedist that I'd heard of a good chiropractor and would like to try this type of care before committing to surgery. You know, you like to feel good before you go into surgery. He strongly advised me against it and suggested instead that I go to a pain clinic and learn to live with my pain. Well, I did not take this advice. In desperation, I made an appointment with a chiropractor, and to my utter surprise, after nearly 12 years of living with it, my sciatic and back pain went away. The profession I was told would cripple or paralyze me gave me back my health. It was one of the most wonderful experiences of my life. For the first time in years, I was able to sleep soundly through the night. I didn't need any double-blind study to convince me of the effectiveness of this care, especially when, in time, my gynecological problems, such as cervical infection and uterine inflammation, also cleared up. You might take a look at that arrow at the bottom that shows where the misaligned vertebrae were causing nerve interference to the organs and joints in the pelvic area. But to make a long story short, the hysterectomy previously prescribed was canceled. Unfortunately, however, for many women, this root cause is not addressed, and we're too often led to the long line awaiting a hysterectomy, cutting away the symptoms only. The traumatic aftermath of a routine hysterectomy is played down by some physicians with a viewpoint that once the uterus and ovaries and even the breasts are removed, you won't have to worry about cancer in this area anymore. A woman is told that this radical surgery will resolve her female disorders. However, the woman who's been there, done that, will tell you this is just not so. Some endure physical as well as mental stress, extreme depression, and even insanity. Of course, there are other women who just complain about the simpler problems such as fatigue, migraine, weight gain, heart palpitations, and if that's not enough, they often become dependent on synthetic hormones that will bring them back to the doctor for the rest of their lives. Why? So the doctor can treat the abnormal cell growth resulting from the prescription they are on. The other day, I spoke with one of my tennis buddies that I hadn't seen in almost 10 years. She told me that she had a total hysterectomy because of endometriosis. She said she had been on Premarin for over 6 years prior to her hysterectomy and has continued to be on it for many years after it. But now, instead of uterine hyperplasia, she was experiencing tissue buildup or endometriosis in her colon. Depressed because the hysterectomy didn't really solve her problems, the doctor added to her estrogen therapy a prescription for Prozac, another top-selling drug to treat her depression. This is not an isolated case, I can tell by some of the laughter out there, but is more common than we may think. And if I had taken this route, I wouldn't be standing here today talking about the power of botanical progesterone. So back to my close encounter with a hysterectomy, I became angry thinking about all the other women who are swayed to undergo surgery. I was mad at all the doctors who misguided me and defamed alternatives that would help millions of patients. I was affected by the injustice of being kept from the truth. As I became stronger mentally and physically, however, I was finally able to convert that energy that created my resentment to energy in helping to spread this vital news about the drugless treatments that set me free. My first book, Today's Health Alternative, is a close relative to the estrogen alternative. Relative? Well, they both have the same last names. They both also focus on the source of our problems and not merely masking discomforts with drugs. The reason I had to tell you about the importance of correcting nerve interference is that I would never have had the energy to document or write about the dangers of estrogen excess if I were still suffering from the effects of vertebral misalignments. On the next overhead, you will see tomorrow's health forecast in the daily news. And for those who can't see it too well, let me read Thomas Edison's predictions. The doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest his patients in the care of the human frame, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease, unquote. The future, the year 2000, will be here sooner than we think. But now, the subject you've all been waiting for. Fortunately, I arrived in good health, just in the nick of time to prepare myself for what was yet to come, the throes of menopause. So advancing into my 50s, hormonal imbalance struck with vengeance. It was obvious I needed help beyond what I knew, emotionally and physically. I went on a merry-go-round of doctors and became involved in this game of Russian roulette with prescribed estrogen. What I didn't know then was what Premarin stands for. Just for curiosity, can I have a show of hands of those who do know? Well, for those who did not raise their hands, I hate to be the one to define its repugnant translation, but Premarin stands for pregnant mare's urine. Delightful, yes. And this truth hurts in more ways than one, as this buildup in our body will eventually have detrimental effects. I also didn't realize we have other choices, and that estrogen comes in many forms, of which there are 3 major groups. The safer form, estriol, is the dominant estrogen during a healthy pregnancy. The other 2 forms that are more potent are called estradiol and estrone. Some studies consider them to be the cancer culprits. And guess what? The pharmaceutical industry mainly uses this more dangerous form, the estradiol, as the active ingredients in most applications for hormone replacement, the pills, the patches, and as well as oral contraceptives. When I first took Premarin in my desperate state of need, I felt good. At first I said, why haven't I taken this sooner? As with other drugs, I was fooled by the temporary relief of the symptoms. And it didn't take long before I began to feel how this foreign substance, which includes synthetic additives, was not compatible with my human metabolism. I began to feel mentally and physically tense, gained weight, had breast tenderness, increasingly poor vision, and memory loss. And once again, sleepless nights. As with other women who complained to their doctor that the prescribed hormone replacement is making them feel bad, I was promptly prescribed a different dose of estrogen, plus one of the synthetic progestins, Provera. I found out quickly that taking Provera was like adding fuel to an already hot fire as I developed fluid retention, cramping, and nervousness. There are warnings listed on the leaflets that accompany the hormone package, but when you're not feeling well, you don't even want to look at the grave risks. One day, I found a magnifying glass so I could read them. Liver disease, malignancy of the breast, cysts, mental depression, blood clots that can occur anywhere in the body, the brain, the lungs, the heart, and cause paralysis and even death. And the medical society tells us that estrogen is good for the heart. How, when the studies clearly show that it can cause blood clots, strokes, and even heart disease? Read Appendix B and all the books out on the tables, and for the other side of the story. Even though there are written warnings on the conventional hormone replacement, some doctors will tell their patients, don't worry about the warnings. They rarely occur. Warnings that the FDA has required the pharmaceutical companies to be placed on these leaflets should not be treated as trivial. This is why we have listed them in the book, so that they could be clearly read. Nevertheless, unopposed estrogen is often the prescription of choice, and as a result, we have observed too many of our friends with endometriosis undergoing mastectomies and hysterectomies. One count is 600,000 hysterectomies performed a year, and according to the American Cancer Society, 180,000 women are diagnosed with breast cancer yearly. This is tragic, and there are many who are not here today to tell about or even understand actually what happened to them and why. When cancer or paralysis happens to us, our mother, daughter, or friend, this is when statistics become real. We're speaking out here today for ladies who never had that chance. And we know Providence has brought many of you here today, providing you or friends that you know with the freedom of choice. not based on hearsay from the drug reps and manufacturers' advertising, but on valid research and common sense. So on a happier note, let's focus on the beauty of plant life. As viewed on the screen, we have a large plant. We can recall again how phytohormones, phyto meaning plant derived, are making a difference. I'll never forget how excited I became when I first read how essential botanical progesterone is as a precursor to other hormones in helping to regulate thyroid disorders as well as blood pressure problems. It lowers cholesterol and it burns fat for energy, and it can guard against heart disease. And when I heard about, and even it regulates respiration and has used to treat infant and adult apnea. I just read that the other day. And when I heard about its antispasmodic effect, I recalled an internet story. A lady was discussing how she had suffered from epilepsy ever since she could remember in her adult life. She observed that her condition was getting worse with age. It was a real concern is that her seizures was always at the same time as the onset of menses. She began using progesterone cream for her premenopausal problems, and to her amazement, her seizures slowly subsided until they finally stopped altogether. Eventually, she was even able to get off her other medications that were causing a variety of side effects. Interestingly, in my personal research, I found that way back in the 40s, progesterone is what they used to successfully treat epilepsy. In one of his published works, Dr. Raymond Peat talks about another related condition. People diagnosed with schizophrenia or manic depression were reported to feel normal after taking progesterone. How great to know where to turn for a natural antidepressant, especially when we think we're going crazy, no control of our highs or our lows. We cry over this or over that or nothing at all. Well, speaking of which, you might want to rent a movie called Tom and Viv. It's a true story of a woman who, after disrupting many lives, was institutionalized, and all this for what we now know to be nothing more than a hormone imbalance. Instead of exploring progesterone's ability to promote mental as well as physical health, too often a prescription is written out for Prozac, which incidentally causes liver disease, aggression, and in 1995, 2,394 deaths were reported with Prozac. So on to wiser choices with progesterone. It will convert fat into energy. It even acts as a natural diuretic. But it can't do its work when it's declining below estrogen levels and eventually declining to almost zero. Depending on a woman's diet and her exposure to toxic environmental estrogens, women find that the older they get, the more they notice an unexplainable tendency to gain weight. This due to the accumulation of estrogen in their fat cells. Granted, diet and exercise are important, but when our hormones are out of balance, it's almost impossible for fat to be converted to energy. Besides weight gain, there are other signs that warn us when we are in estrogen overload. Some women may develop fibroids or endometriosis, another indication that they are deficient in progesterone. Everyone is affected by this imbalance in a different way, all the more reason why we have to learn to be aware of the signals of our own body, a great diagnostic tool. Questions of how and where to use progesterone are discussed in the Estrogen Alternative and are based on many excellent books and studies written by some of the pioneers of natural progesterone, such as Dr. Katrina Dalton, Dr. Geraldine Pryor, Dr. Joel Hargrove, Dr. Raymond Peat, and of course, one of the most eminent leaders in this field, Dr. John Lee, whose message is making a difference in the lives of women all over the world. He continues to educate and motivate women to a better quality of life. And I'd like to personally thank him for helping me with some of the more technical aspects of my book. He is a wonderful teacher and mentor to many people as he generously gives his expertise and his time. He's performing a valuable service for women of all ages. And what many of us have never realized is that progesterone deficiency can occur with some women way before menopause. For instance, following stress, trauma from an accident, or surgery. Even miscarriages can be caused by high estrogen, low progesterone levels. So women, young and old, should be aware of the possible need to create a balance between these two hormones, especially during childbearing years, if there's indication of infertility. We have quoted some amazing studies in the chapter called Seasons of a Woman's Life. There is documentation that explains how estrogen excess can kill the embryo by suffocation, and that progesterone protects the embryo by promoting the delivery of both oxygen and glucose. As far back as 1929, it was discovered that progesterone had to be available in sufficient quantity in order to allow conception to occur. Progesterone enables the egg to mature. It was intriguing for me to witness how this phytohormone can also benefit women who suffer from other health disorders in their lives. For instance, one of my doctors had been suffering from fibrocystic breast disease for over 15 years, started in her 30s, and has since undergone multiple needle biopsies and surgery. As her fibrocysts were getting worse, her doctors wanted to perform more surgery. I quickly gave her the medical data that showed that fibrocysts are formed when estrogen dominates in our body, and told her she'd be wise to first try this transdermal cream that would rebalance her hormones naturally. You just rub it on the soft skin area in your body. It goes from the fat layers through the blood cell membranes and then to the receptor sites, which are all over our body, in our brainstem, eyes, lungs, liver, adrenals, uterus, and vagina. Interesting, all these places are areas that give us trouble during PMS and menopause. My doctor began conscientiously applying the progesterone cream to the sites of the lumps of her breast and on the abdomen once in the morning and at night. The next month I saw her, she was absolutely amazed. Her periods came on time for the first time ever and with no more heavy clotting. The second month, she no longer had breast pain or pressure, and the swelling had gone down. On the third month, her fibrocysts had disappeared. And by the way, this is one of many women who was not even on prescribed estrogen. It was her own estrogen that was elevated, and possibly due to either her diet or stress levels or other environmental factors that we all have to live with. Real stories about health issues continue to confirm the technical studies that explain the power and potential of plant-based progesterone for increasing bone mineral density. For instance, a dear friend of mine in her 70s was a former nurse and had naturally always been health conscious, trying to follow her doctor's orders to the letter. I had a lot of compassion for her because my own mother was also a nurse. I was told, you don't question your doctor. The doctor always knows best. Well, my friend had just heard from her orthopedic surgeon that the shocking news that she had quite a lot of bone loss. He proposed that she be thinking about a hip replacement. After she drove home with tears of disbelief of being diagnosed with osteoporosis, she telephoned me and said, I don't understand why I'm having bone loss. I've always believed in preventive care by taking my estrogen for over 25 years, thinking that this was good for my bones. I even take my Tums regularly for calcium as suggested by my medical doctor. How do you tell a nurse that she's been on the wrong hormone for all these years? And that there are 1.2 million women suffering from osteoporotic fractures a year, and even though many are on estrogen replacement therapy. So I gave my nurse friend the osteoporosis chapter, which included studies about progesterone's role in stimulating new bone tissue and how it was capable of reversing osteoporosis. After reading this, her ambivalent feelings were quite apparent. On one hand, she felt robbed of her health because she had been used the wrong hormone for so long, but on the other hand, she was relieved to read that the evidence that progesterone can restore bone density. I had to also give her the studies from the nutrition chapter reporting that calcium in Tums is the calcium that cannot be absorbed by the body and can in fact be dangerous in the long run. And that calcium only in organic plant-based form should be used and always be accompanied with equal or greater amounts of magnesium. It also lists the additional minerals that must be taken so it can properly be assimilated and do its work in building bones, not stones. But getting back to the real life situations, there's nothing more convincing to me than the amazing progesterone stories I hear from countless number of women, some I've never met face to face. Although there's plenty of scientific evidence about the needs and benefits of progesterone, which you will hear later on, I like the living evidence, stories we hear that have brought dignity and happiness and useful activity back into one's daily life. One such account was with a fibromyalgia patient that I met at a senior citizens fair. This delightful lady came over to my book signing booth and told me she had fibromyalgia. I told her that I was really interested in the fact that fibromyalgia mimics all the characteristics of high estrogen and low progesterone levels, resulting in depression, fluid retention, joint and muscle pain, headaches, insomnia, poor memory, and even PMS. In a book on arthritis, I found numerous studies explaining that fibromyalgia symptoms are often similar to disorders such as chemical sensitivity, chronic fatigue syndrome, and even Lyme disease. The Mayo Clinic, however, asserts that fibromyalgia is a common form of chronic rheumatism. So my newfound friend decided to read what the estrogen alternative had to say about this. After reading the study, she then began using the topical progesterone cream, and after approximately 1 month, she called me, excitedly announced that almost all of her fibromyalgia symptoms were gone. She was particularly happy when her distended abdomen began slimming down, and she had to buy new clothes a couple of sizes smaller. This lady was not shy about speaking her mind when necessary, especially about the critical news that brought her back to health. So I wondered what her doctor was going to say when she said, "Well, doctor, after only 1 month of using this plant-based progesterone cream, applying it to my body, my fibromyalgia symptoms just disappeared." Can you imagine what the doctor was thinking at this point? Probably, I know a good specialist who can help this woman with these unusual fantasies. But this dear lady, she knew she was onto something. For over 30 years, she had been living with these problems, and the only time she had been completely symptom-free in her married life was when she'd been pregnant, 7 times. As Dr. Lee tells us, and I quote, "In pregnancy, the placenta produces 300 to 400 milligrams of progesterone a day in the 3rd trimester," unquote. And this is when many women, although a bit uncomfortable, do feel the healthiest. What is interesting is that this amount is approximately 10 times higher than what's normally produced in the ovulating woman. What a great protection progesterone provides us during pregnancy. It's the hormone that is essential for the survival of the embryo. Perhaps it's also essential for the survival of our good health. So this mother of 7 suspected all along that her problems must have been hormone related. She telephoned me and jubilantly sang God's praises for his finally giving her some answers that made sense. She knew that he sent her to my booth at the fair that day, and I also thanked him for enlightening us that our deficiency disorders or imbalances, whether hormonal or nutrition, don't have to be labeled with complicated terms such as fibromyalgia or any other disease for that matter. Granted, some people like to have names for their disease. I remember when I used to have terrible back pain, and one doctor said he could find nothing wrong. It was all in my head. Went to another doctor, and he diagnosed me with sciatica. I was so excited and so relieved to be a sciatica patient rather than a hypochondriac patient. There's no time for me to talk in detail about cancer prevention, but somebody who had not read my book said, "Your next book should be about cancer." The estrogen alternative is and includes studies that show how botanical progesterone opposes estrogen to stop cells from multiplying and thus assists in fighting cancer. One of my main editors cured herself of breast cancer through the numerous methods we list. She refused to take chemotherapy and radiation, and it took courage, but she did it, and it worked. She was extremely instrumental in providing other useful material for the cancer and nutrition chapter. So for those of you who are concerned about the cancer risk and have hereditary tendencies, as she had, you will find resources for cancer cures. When facing a crisis, it can be reassuring and even empowering to learn about the cause of disease and be more alert to misdiagnosis and thus mistreatment. Traditional medicine is not normally in tune with the philosophy of rebalancing our body systems as a means of eliminating disease, or is it directed to the healing powers found within natural foods and phytonutrients. So it is our responsibility alone to learn about ways of improving our health. We need to be aware that while food can be medicine, some food have toxic qualities. One example is to avoid any products labeled hydrogenated that are found in margarines and salad dressings. These are in a great majority of packaged and processed foods. Read the labels because these denatured foods cannot be absorbed well as real food and can eventually block cellular communication. Extensive endocrinology studies clearly demonstrates that most vegetable oils suppress digestive enzymes and especially suppress the production of our hormones. There are 2 unsaturated oils that are the exception and are healthy for us: extra virgin, extra only olive oil. And this may surprise you, but coconut oil in its unrefined form has a therapeutic effect of the body by activating metabolism and can normalize cholesterol levels by promoting its conversion into pregnenolone. And of course, pregnenolone is the precursor to progesterone. It's so encouraging and really enlightening to hear from researchers whose conclusions are based on the science of endocrinology rather than of advertising propaganda from food and pharmaceutical manufacturers. And the biochemists will tell us not to be misled by no cholesterol labels. They are just an advertising gimmick. It's what's in the product that creates the imbalance between our own LDL and HDL levels. In other words, the enzyme inhibitors, the additives, the preservatives are the enemy, not cholesterol. The cholesterol our body makes is our friend and critical to our well-being, and any interference with the formation of cholesterol will in turn obstruct its protective powers. Hormones such as pregnenolone and progesterone are dependent on cholesterol so that they can do their jobs as precursors to all the hormones. Speaking of protective powers, let's look at the colorful picture which illustrates other ways to achieve balance by adding more living plant-based organic foods, such as barley green, carrot juice, fresh organic fruits, and vegetables. They will not only increase the living enzymes that our body needs, but also will assist in promoting hormone balance. And rediscovering of the use of the essential oils is coming to the forefront in phytochemical research. They have been found to support and rebuild the immune system. We need all the above for rebalancing and obtaining homeostasis. The whole is so far more efficient as it depends on many of its parts. Phytonutrients are so fundamental to the functioning of our body, we need them to take the place of those products we hear about daily on the colorful TV ads with their spectacular soundtracks for ibuprofen, Motrin, Aleve, Advil, Tylenol, and we need to also question TV news about the designer estrogens and other supposed wonder drugs. And particularly, let's get away from the drugs referred to as the 3 Ps, Premarin, Provera, and Prozac. The effects of these drugs on our health, our sanity, and our whole household budget is enough to even give our husbands hot flashes. But seriously, the 3 Ps ultimately brings women back to their doctor's offices for more diagnostic testing, periodic D&Cs, hysterectomies, and mastectomies. And in our innocence and desperate need for help, we go along with these organized systems thinking we can't do anything about the politics and vested interest behind the standard hormone replacement. However, author Dr. Marcus Lowe tells us women want and are now asking their doctors for solutions to drugs and natural products that our body requires. Learning about the medicinal powers within plant life and sharing our experiences by reaching out to others with this vital remedy from God's garden will give options based on education, not on desperation. Medical treatment needs to be refined to a more natural and gentler care. We all need to educate ourselves in this area. I've included in my book a list of 14 key references, including both of Dr. Lee's important books. You'll find that the information will provide confidence you need to seek natural alternatives. And perhaps some of you here today will be the ones who will pave the way in motivating others to spread the good news that will provide today's women with the knowledge that is so lacking in allopathic medicine. You will also find information in the book on how to find the right doctor on your own wherever you live. And it's so refreshing to finally find a doctor who has an open mind and listens because he or she knows there has to be a safer and better way for women. Working as a team, we can make good things happen. I'd like to close now by referring to the last chapter of my book. It was my favorite chapter to write because I didn't have to reference all my studies with clinical studies and medical abstracts, and instead I had to dredge up my past memories of my own vulnerable state of needing help. But the memories of the experience was actually the fuel that helped me to write how to be armed, confident, and assertive when taking the research into your doctor's office that explains the body's need for safe, botanical progesterone. I thank you for listening, and God bless you and lead you in making the right choices. Thank you.